I'm finally starting to think that AMD might be a buy. In just the last 5 trading days, this stock has fallen by 23%. I definitely don't think this is the bottom for AMD because there are a number of different things that are going to be occurring over the course of the next month that could certainly send the stock lower. But in this video, I do want to look at what potential downside I think there's left in AMD's stock price, as well as where the upside is for this company and what the likelihood is over the next couple of years that the stock ends up lower than this current price. But let me know your opinion down in the comments section. Is this the bottom, or do we have a lot further left to fall? Thank you guys so much for tuning into this video. If you do enjoy the content, make sure to drop a like down below and subscribe for more videos like this one. And of course, stick around till the very end of the video and we will take a look at the YouTube portfolio and I will go over the moves that I am specifically making in the market right now. AMD is down by almost 23% in the last 5 trading days. Over the course of the last month, the stock has now fallen by almost 20%. But it gets even crazier when you look at the last 6 months, because this stock has been cut by over half, now down by almost 55%. And now the stock is sitting at a price that we haven't seen since February of 2023. Just a few months prior to then, the stock bottomed in October of 2022 around $56 per share. From that point on, the stock went on a massive run, moving up by almost 300% to over $200 per share. And a big driver around this initial dip in AMD's stock price back in 2022 was poor earnings performance. We can see that in the third quarter of 2022, they put up only 4 cents of EPS. That was followed by a quarter of negative 3 cents of EPS and then a quarter of negative 9 cents of EPS. Today, we are not currently seeing that trend. Their trailing 12-month EPS is sitting at $1 exactly. We have seen a small downturn in their EPS quarter over quarter. They put up 47 cents in the third quarter of 2024, followed by 30 cents in the fourth quarter of 2024. So there is a slight downward trend currently going on with this company in terms of their EPS numbers. And we'll get a glimpse into how AMD has performed over the last quarter on April 29th. That's when they're expected to announce their Q1 2025 numbers. And that is going to be a very interesting time period, because what I anticipate is the market won't necessarily care what AMD actually reports. What they are going to be focused on is how AMD is guiding for the future. And obviously, guidance is important during any earnings announcement. However, with how dynamic the economy is right now, investors are going to be paying very close attention to what companies are guiding over the next couple of quarters. And we're going to get our first glimpse into that on Friday, April 11th. That is when we start to see some of these big banks actually announce their earnings. JP Morgan is going to be announcing, as well as Wells Fargo. And Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan, is one of the most well-respected CEOs in industry. And people are going to pay very close attention to what he says and to what all CEOs are saying. At the end of the day, CEOs have very little incentive to talk positively about the next couple of quarters. There's so much uncertainty out there, they don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. So what they will likely do is try and project the uncertainty that there is in the economy and around their business and how that could affect their business over the next couple of quarters. And one of the things that investors hate the most is uncertainty. If CEOs are coming out and they are not certain around where their business is headed over the next 6 months, that is a bad sign for the overall economy and for the stock market in general. And we even see that in the VIX. The VIX measures volatility. Right now, it's sitting at a 52. We have only seen this twice in the last 20 years. That is back in 2020 and back in 2008. So my point in saying all of this is there could be potentially more downside for AMD's stock. However, here's what I am thinking. Over the next 6 months, we could see downside, especially around small cap stocks. I think for stocks like AMD that have already fallen a significant amount, that downside is going to be limited. They have already fallen by so much that there's only so much that the market can really price in. It would take a significant amount of negativity around this company for it to be driven down much further. And we'll go over specific numbers a little later in this video. However, what I think could happen over the next probably probably 6 months to a year is we see a bottoming out and we start to see a potential of the Fed lowering interest rates. And that could be massive for AMD. And in my opinion, if we see a drop in interest rates sometime again in the next 6 to 12 months, what I think that could spur is additional investments into AI and data centers. We have already seen big tech companies like Meta announce that they are still planning to spend billions of dollars on data centers and building out their infrastructure over the next couple of years. And that could be huge for AMD. AMD has increased their revenue in data centers specifically by 69% year over year. And you might think that is great. 69% growth year over year is awesome, but why wouldn't you just invest into NVIDIA? They are growing their data center revenue by over 90% year over year. The point in not investing in NVIDIA has more to do with the lack of diversification that they have as a business. If you look at NVIDIA, their data center revenue last quarter came in at $35.6 billion. In the quarter in total revenue, they only brought in $39.3 billion. That means 90% of NVIDIA's revenue is coming from data centers. If we happen to see a pullback, and I am wrong about what happens over the next year or so, the Fed doesn't cut interest rates, big tech companies don't invest into data centers, then at the end of the day, NVIDIA is going to be hit in a massive way, and they would have a ton of downside to the stock. However, AMD does not as heavily rely on data center revenue. So let's start there with AMD. What do I think is the downside potential with this company? Right now for 2026, analysts have a low EPS estimate of $4.62. This is non-GAAP EPS. Keep that in mind. Some of the numbers we were looking at earlier were GAAP EPS numbers. So let's start with this low EPS estimate of $4.62. With a current stock price of $76.45, that means the forward P ratio is currently sitting at a 16.55. If we assume that AMD could trade down to a forward PE of 10, which we have seen for some companies in the past, think about Meta in 2022, they traded down to around a 10 forward P ratio. That would result in a stock price of $46.20, or around a 40% downside from the current stock price. So let's add a little bit of context to these numbers, because $4.62 on its own really doesn't mean a whole lot. How would we get to a number like that? In 2024, they put up $3.31. Current projections for 2025 have the company putting up $4.66. That is 40% growth in 2025. And then they have the company growing by 0% in 2026. In my opinion, I could see this being backwards. I could see the company in 2025 putting up around $3.31 again. That would be 0% growth year over year. However, in 2026, again, if we see the Fed drop interest rates, then I think that 40% growth is a lot more reasonable, and that would get them to around this $4.60 of EPS. And even if we don't see the Fed drop interest rates in 2025, as long as big tech continues to invest in AI, then I think AMD has a great chance of growing their business in 2025. It's just a lot more reasonable to expect higher growth if we do see a drop in interest rates, because at that point, big tech will be even more incentivized to reinvest in their business. And even if AMD underperforms and they come in at the low end of analyst expectations around this $4.62, if we see valuation expansion, the stock will still go up, because if we see it expand to 20, that would result in a stock price of $92. If we see valuation go up to 30, that would result in a stock price of almost $140. But now let's start considering some rate cuts in 2025. If we see the Fed drop interest rates down to 3 to 4%, I think AMD could easily achieve $6.24 of EPS. At that point, if AMD is growing at that fast of a pace, I think 25 to 30 is a reasonable valuation for the company. Easily a 20 PE ratio should be achievable. That would result in stock prices anywhere from $125 per share to $187 per share. And if we want to be ultra bullish and we say the Fed is going to cut interest rates down to 0 to 1% because the economy deteriorates in a significant manner, then maybe AMD could achieve $9.10 over the course of the next year. I think that's a little bit unlikely just because for the economy to deteriorate that much, we would have to see weakness in EPS numbers, which ultimately would affect AMD. So I think that's difficult for AMD to achieve this type of number, but at that point, a 30 PE ratio would be easily achievable, which would result in a stock price of $273 per share. That's great. We've looked at some extreme bull cases as well as some bearish cases, but what is my opinion on what could happen for AMD? I think in 2025, we could potentially see their EPS numbers decline slightly, down to $3.15. If we see the stock trade at a 20 PE ratio because of this, we're seeing their revenue potentially maybe decline slightly, as well as their EPS numbers decline, then a 20 forward P ratio I think is reasonable. That would result in a stock price of $63 per share, which would be about 17% downside from the current stock price, again, of around $76.45. However, if over 2025 we start seeing some optimism in the market and we see their forward valuation go up to 30, that could result in the stock price jumping up to $95 per share. And I think in 2026, we could potentially see a massive pull forward in demand, especially around chips, which results in AMD hitting an EPS of $4.75. If they do that and we see their valuation go to around a 25, which is perfectly reasonable for the market, that would result in a stock price of $118.75 or 55% upside from the current stock price. And you might think 55%, that seems like a low return over the next 2 years. However, first off, that is a great return compared to the S&P 500 and what we've consistently seen over time. That would be fantastic. But also keep in mind that these are forward valuations. If I'm saying that AMD, I think, could put up $4.75 in 2026, that means by the end of 2025, they could potentially be trading at around $120 per share. And something we haven't really seen AMD do, but they could do to help their EPS numbers, is buy back shares. Right now, their share count outstanding has trended around 1.6 billion shares over the last couple of years, and we have not seen them buy back any shares. However, the stock price has fallen so much that now could be a good time for them to start buying back some of their outstanding shares. So what moves am I making in the market? This is the YouTube portfolio, and it's currently sitting at a value of $53,470.64. And in this portfolio, we hold Google, Supermicrocomputer, Microsoft, Visa, SoFi, Alibaba, Palantir, Apple, and PayPal. And the most recent moves that I made in this portfolio is I bought more Google. I'm now sitting at 50 shares with a total market value just over $7,100. I've also sold out of both of my dividend ETFs. I had VYM and SCHD, and I now have a cash pile of $29,000. However, I will tell you that I just entered 2 buy orders. One is for Google. I want to buy more shares. I'm down 10% on this position. I think Google over the next 5 years is an easy winner, and that is why I continue to buy more. The second buy order was for AMD. Tomorrow morning, I will add it to this portfolio. I bought around $2,000 worth of the company. I think over the next 5 years, AMD will be a clear winner. And obviously, if we continue to see these 2 companies fall, I have plenty of cash on the sidelines to pile into them more. I talked about it in this video. The reason I don't build out a full position all at once is because there's plenty of downside potential with earnings season right around the corner. If we see a lot of negativity, I think these 2 stocks, Google and AMD, could fall even further. But remember, don't buy a company just because some random guy on YouTube talked about it. Make sure you are doing your own research and looking into companies that meet your risk tolerance as well as your time horizon. I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know in the comment section, what stocks are you paying attention to right now? The market is certainly getting into a position where a lot of companies are on sale. So let me know down below. I appreciate all the support on the channel. Drop a like down below and subscribe for more videos like this one. And as always, have a wonderful rest of your day. And for the joke of the day, why did the car take a nap? Check the comments down below for the answer. Thanks for watching.